Let's see if we're ready to go. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for the next episode in the virtual presentation of Nerdstock, which was originally done as an in-person learning opportunity during the Fire Department Safety Officers Conference in January of 2023 that brought together a group of people that have been involved and engaged in fire service research funded through the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant Program and in other ways from the very beginning to better understand where we've been, what has set the tone for current practices in the fire service, what we know, what we don't know, where we're going, what we need to do. And then to bring those to folks that didn't have the opportunity to attend and spread the message. So today we're talking about risk factors and modifiable risk factors. And with us is Dr. Susie Day, Dr. Sara Jahnke. They're going to talk about both of those things and they'll do their presentations. We'll have an opportunity for some questions. So get your notepads out because there's going to be a pile of important information that we can learn from relative to risk factors in humans in firefighting. So with that, Susie, it's all yours.
Thank you, John. I'll share my screen for you guys. And there we go. Is that looking good on you guys in, John?
That is perfect right there.
Great. Well, it's fun to be here with you today. And yes, I think Sara and I will probably be able to chit chat for quite a while. We were limited at the actual Nerdstock meeting, so I was pretty pleased when we got a chance to record this and actually have more than our 10 minutes that we were allowed that day. Because as you'll see, I've got a lot of things to share with you. I approach this process by starting with what's been funded with R&D, since that's really what this is all about. So I went to the abstracts that were online for the R&D program. And then I went through and started looking for the studies that have been done since the onset of the program related to obesity, nutrition, alcohol, and physical activity. Big areas, each of which I could spend hours on each one individually. But I tried to do this and then put it into a synopsis of what do we know? What are the messages that we can take home from all this great research that has been funded through the R&D program? So all of you could find these abstracts in the abstract book, which is online. There's nothing that I'm going to show you that isn't available either there or through PubMed. So after I looked at the abstracts, then I went through the studies, and then I looked up the papers of those authors in PubMed, and then I kind of cross-referenced that so that I could find other studies that were relevant to that may not have been picked up. So in that doing, I went through and I put together a presentation, and there is one slide on each of those big topics. So each of the slides looks the same in terms of how it's organized. So I'll kind of walk through that. So the first one I'm going to talk about today is obesity. And what is the problem? Well, there are a lot of health problems. That's what's in this column. And then there's a lot of great messages that we have related to this that are from the results of the studies that have been done. And then over here, I have the projects. These are the R&D numbers, which you could find in the abstract book, which associate with this. And I'll start with a caveat. I may not have a completely exhaustive list. I tried hard. I went through all the sources and things that I could find in the public domain that are related to these particular studies. And if I've missed any, sorry, you drop me a note and let me know. I'd love to have that for future talks. So let's go through here and talk. For obesity, what are those health problems? We see that cardiovascular disease, cancer, injuries, reduced fitness, absenteeism, and workers' compensation claims have been highlighted as some of the less than positive outcomes of being overweight and obese. But we've made a lot of advances. There's been a lot of work that's focused on this. And so that's what we'll go to now and look at some of these messages from that work that's been done. So first off, what is the problem? Up here at the top, overweight and obesity in men is about 73 to 88% in the fire service, really high. Obesity in the career women is about 15.4%, and among men, it's 33.5%. Note that the women indeed are less, and I think Sarah's going to probably talk about that too in her presentation. Among the volunteer women, it's about 31.6%, and among men, it's about 43.2%. Again, the women are less than what the men are. So what are the other messages? BMI is an acceptable obesity measure. Now, some people contest that because of the body build of firefighters, and they feel that perhaps that is not a sensitive enough measure, but research has been looked at, and we feel that BMI is a good acceptable obesity measure. And also it's better if we also add in waist circumference. So sometimes we have two measures to look at adiposity so that we can have a better indication of the body size of a particular person. Cardiovascular disease risk is positively associated with BMI among both the overweight and the obese, and studies have shown this. Obese firefighters who haven't got adequate sleep have increased injury risks. We've had some great studies done with R&D funds looking at injury risk, and they have indeed quantified that those that are a higher weight and a higher BMI and don't have the sleep have those increased risks. Overweight and obesity is positively associated with the number of self-reported health days. So we asked the firefighters about the number of days that they did not feel well, and during periods of time that was documented, and it was associated positively with those who were overweight and obese. Another thing we did was we looked at what was their perception of overweight and obesity, and did they recognize themselves as being overweight, obese? And then also we asked them about if they had seen a health provider in the last year, and if they had, and if they received some weight recommendations, did that make a difference? And they did feel that when they got those messages from their health providers, that it would make a difference. It would make them step back and think a little harder about what their body size was. So that's a good thing. The young and healthy firefighters were getting less weight loss recommendations than the older ones who most of the time had other comorbid types of conditions. And so the older firefighters were being reminded and told, but the young ones weren't. And that's really a missed opportunity, because we need to catch the guys when they're younger and be able to make some intervention and be able to help them make change so that they can have a long and full career in the fire service. We've found that departments who are implementing the well-developed health promotion programs. Well, what does that mean? Well-developed means they had a varied assortment of health promoting items in those programs, such as overall body composition, levels of physical activity, exercise, and job satisfaction. We saw those things were increased, which means that has resulted in some of those that were actually intervention type of programs in less obesity, less anxiety disorders, and smoking. So those are good things. We also have seen that overweight and obese firefighters can lose, and did, 2 to 3 pounds after a 6-month mobile and web-based nutrition and physical activity trial. So it's not a completely bad story at all, because we have done studies, we've shown that the firefighters can change and can make a difference. So let's talk about general nutrition, because we have done nutrition studies. What are the problems with the general nutrition of firefighters? If we go down the problem list in that column, we see that the problems associated with poor nutrition are cardiovascular disease, cancer, obesity, hypertension, and reduced fitness. So what have we learned? Here's the projects that have been associated with looking at these topics. And the messages is that, first of all, the food intake is generally not healthy. Well, it's probably not real surprising to a lot of you who have been in and lived in and worked in those firehouses, although it does vary across the country. We have found that alcohol was the second highest source of calories, followed by salty snacks, noodles, rice, French fries, and hash browns. But this one should make you sit up and think, and remember this when we get to the slide on alcohol in a few minutes. Many of those top high calorie foods were oftentimes the processed foods that have a lot of empty sugar calories. It's seen in the fire service when we've asked and talked to firefighters that large portions are seen as a way to maximize the value of the meals. Sort of the idea of, by golly, I paid for this, so I want to eat a lot. And then they purchase high calorie, high sugar foods, and then it's just sort of a perpetuating thing. Most do not practice any specific diet, but they'd like to learn how to eat healthy. We've heard that in a lot of different ways among firefighters across the country, in volunteer and in career, that they don't necessarily call what they're doing a specific diet, but many of them who are trying are doing some things that are very much in line with a lot of the key diets and the ones that have shown to be particularly helpful in terms of overweight and obesity. The firehouse eating culture is unique, and it opens some unique ideas for how to present interventions, because that idea of the kitchen table, everybody gets together around the kitchen table in the career firefighters particularly, and that's a time to talk, to share, to begin to think about how the group is doing things. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity, and future interventions should keep that in mind. Firefighters can change what they eat. We've shown that, and that's terrific. And we have seen that obese firefighters are often likely to be hypohydrated, which is, again, an additional risk for the obese firefighters when they're on the fire ground, particularly, because that really impacts their readiness. We've seen in a pilot study with Mediterranean diet that they only had modest changes in adherence to their diet and metabolic biomarkers that were related to lipids. In a 12-week web and app-based randomized controlled trial of time-restricted eating, firefighters reduced the window of time they ate by 3 hours. So again, the message out of these is that, can firefighters change? Yes. Can they make some differences? Yes. Are they interested? Yes. And there is some opportunities for readiness for future interventions. Let's look at the next one, alcohol. So what are the problems with alcohol? The problem is it's associated with cardiovascular disease, cancer, injuries, stress, anxiety, PTSD, and then general nutrition. 85% of men and 83% of females consume alcohol off duty. So it is something that is done by a large proportion of the fire service. Nearly 50% of men and 40% of women firefighters have reported excessive drinking. Both men and women report intoxicated driving, albeit the numbers are small, 9% in the men and 4% in the women. They did report it. Firefighters, in comparison with officers or chiefs and those with fewer service years, had particularly high levels of alcohol intake. So this speaks to the issue that we know, and that is that the longer the person is in the fire service, the more it is impacting their behavioral health, because those, the stress, the anxiety, the PTSD, all those things could be mounting and building. And alcohol is a way that a lot look to seek some, a way out and a break from all that mental health issues. Among firefighters who drank, the energy derived from alcohol sometimes averaged as much as 539 calories. That's like 18% of total energy. And 25% of the firefighters consumed over 770 calories from alcohol a day. Some were even consuming as many calories in a day from alcohol as they did from food. Now, these were off duty. I'll make that clarification. That was not something that was an issue about drinking on duty, but this was the off-duty alcohol consumption. Having a department health promotion program that did not impact the level of drinking. So the general types of programs that say, wellness and impact many different programs, albeit that's a good way to impact some aspects of improving the health of firefighters. For alcohol, they seem to need a tailored approach. to really address the causes and help them with some tools and some approaches for how to augment that area. All right, so this last one here is fitness and physical activity. So what is the problems that are associated with this? Cardiovascular disease, cancer, injuries, obesity, and work performance. You see, many of these same health problems are associated with all of these risk factors that I'm talking about today. The job requires high levels of aerobic fitness, anaerobic capacity, muscular strength, endurance. We've learned that the 12 METS treadmill test is a minimum exercise capacity to really result in safe firefighting. A high level of cardiovascular fitness is needed to improve the performance and decrease that risk of job fatalities, because when they get into those real strenuous situations and with a strenuous activity, they've got to have that fitness level to be able to maintain themselves. We've looked at a lot of things, and you see all the projects there on the right-hand side that have gotten into this very in depth, even looking at how many work intervals is best to help give guidance to the fireground so that you know how many times you can be taken in and out of and have a recovery time so that you can actually be able to continue without altering your performance and, again, your cardiovascular risks. The health and fitness does improve with training academies, and that's terrific. When they come out of the academy and they graduate, their training-derived gains, though, are typically lost pretty soon because there isn't a maintenance required for that. And so that, again, opens the door to ideas for opportunities for the future for how to maintain that fitness level. Women in career and volunteer firefighters engaged in heavy physical activity were less obese. Firefighters can reduce their injury risk from fitness programs. Worksite interventions, including back and core exercise training, are safe and effective and can really improve the back and core muscular endurance. Again, we've had some great studies in this area. We've got some ongoing things in this area. And these are good programs and need to be sustained. Firefighters who actually participated in the high intensity training were twice as likely to meet that fitness recommendation. So again, as firefighters look at ways to help improve their fitness level, to help reduce some of these health problems, really getting engaged in training, which is at a high intense level, if anything, to kind of mirror or imitate what we see on the fireground, is beneficial. So that's the 4 huge topics with a ton of messages. And there's many funded studies that are ongoing right now in areas related to all of these. And again, you can see all of the studies that are currently funded in that abstract book. We don't have results really from the studies that have been in place since about 2017 and 2018, because again, most of the studies are about 3 years and they're coming to closure. And again, with COVID, there was a little bit of delay. So we've got many more exciting things coming out. And so I'm going to end it like the nerds that we all are and say that one of our favorite things, which is, so do we need to do more work? Yes. Is there work that's ongoing? Yes. And are there some results that we should be excited about? Yes. So I think I'm going to stop here, John, and I'll turn it back to you and Sara. So thank you very much.
Outstanding. Thank you, Susie. And I, for people listening and people in the audience, you don't have to wait for those studies to be done. I think Susie was very, very clear that there's plenty that we can work on now. And even if we start on that stuff now, we're still never going to be done. So don't we'll wait for the next greatest thing to get. There is an absolute massive amount of things that all of us can work on, even if you just take one segment of it to move the needle on how well prepared we are to provide service to our community. So thank you for that. And we'll transition a little bit from a big picture view to what Sara's going to talk about that has a little bit more of a finer point on it, but still in an area that we need greater exploration of. So with that, Sara, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you. And just spoiler alert, there will never be a study that we say we have the answer and more research isn't needed. So if you're waiting for us to get to the point where we say that we're done, you're going to be waiting forever because every question we ask brings up so many more questions, which is the good part, right? Job security for us. All right, I'm going to share my screen and you can tell me if I'm doing it right. All right, and hold up. Am I good? No?
Now, you need the step 2 of whatever you did the last time.
I don't know what I'm doing. All right, let's try this one. There.
Beautiful.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research on fire women. Sometimes people say, oh, it doesn't matter that we say firemen, it's all encompassing. So then my response to that is, let's just call everyone fire women or fire chicks and see how people are on board with that. Can I talk a little bit about the research that we've done on fire women and kind of where it came from? FEMA's actually funded quite a bit of work in this space, which is awesome. But the reason that that a lot of work has been funded in this space is because early on there was not a lot of work funded in this space. So some of the early work and projects that we did, one of our first funded projects through FEMA was the 2007 firefighter injury and risk evaluation study. And then following that was the Fuel to Fight, where we did 20 departments. Firefighter injury and risk was 24 departments. In the Missouri Valley region, Fuel to Fight was 20 departments nationwide. So 10 that had implemented wellness fitness initiative and 10 that hadn't. And the followed up a 2014 study that they funded looking at behavioral health interventions. And we had women in these studies early on. So this was up to, obviously quite a while ago, we had women that had studies that had women. It's been a long week, I apologize. But we had studies that included women. But what we found in these early studies is that we weren't able to stratify by gender, because when we went to publish it, the response was, you can't make statistical comparisons because the sample size is so small that you can't compare based on gender. And so a lot of the early studies, they would ask us to take the sample of women out of the sample before we published it. Our group and others, not because they didn't want to include women, but because there wasn't a large enough sample to be able to generalize. So it was frustrating for our team, because we weren't able to get anything specific to women in the fire service. And so we and others called for more research specific to the health of women firefighters. And we realized, if you go in, the Fuel to Fight study had 1,007 firefighters in it. But if you look at the rate of women in the fire service, anywhere between 4 and 11%, just depending on the sample that you're looking at. That's very few women specifically. So we realized it was important to look specifically at women and to assess women and recruit specifically for women, because you're not going to get it if you just go department to department and hope that you add those numbers in. And so we designed and worked on a couple different projects. One was funded by the National Institutes of Health through the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, where we looked at, did a formative examination of health and safety for female firefighters. We did a survey. This was specific to career firefighters at the time, did a survey and also some qualitative work. So a lot of the research and what has informed the data we've collected, it was based on that early, really sitting down with women in the fire service and saying, what do you see as health needs? What are the concerns? What do we need to be studying? FEMA then funded in 2015 the first large-scale study of women in the fire service, funded to look at both career and volunteer women. And it was really some foundational, Richard Gist from KCFD one time said, when we start this research, we're not picking up the low-hanging fruit, we're picking up the rotting fruit off the ground and starting with that. And really these early studies were kind of just like the most basic of basic, looking at health risks of women and saying, what do we even need to study? With some of the early work with men, we found that we needed to look at things like obesity and cardiovascular risk factors. And then it grew into cancer. The women has led us in some similar directions, but it's them not so similar. And so it's really grown. What we found from the early work on women and weighing and measuring was that women actually in the fire service tend to be relatively healthy. They tend to be more fit, more physically active than men. Rates of obesity for women in the fire service are not only lower than rates for men in the fire service, but lower than rates of obesity in the general population. So women, can overcome. Susie did a great job about talking about some of those modifiable risk factors. They do a great job of overcoming some of that obesogenic environment in the fire service and really work hard to be healthy. But there were some results that we did not expect, and it's led to some new work in terms of what we know and what we want to know about women. In particular, FEMA funded two projects. One was under R&D, the women firefighters looking at stress, cancer risk, and reproductive toxicity. That was led by Dr. Burgess, and we worked on that with him, looking at the stress of women and how we can support women sometimes in ways that they aren't supported in the firehouse. And I'll talk a little bit about that and where that came from. There was also a funded project to Women in Fire, looking at how can we create some support for women. Again, we see a significant impact of stress in a different way than we see for men. And so we have some work on that too. So both under the research, then now also moving to prevention. One of the areas that we did not anticipate being such a, more research is needed, definitely came into play here. We did some foundational work, asking some questions, and found some things we didn't expect to be as significant as they ended up being. We know from some work done by the IAFF and Joy McDermott's group up in Canada, that was really beautiful work in the 90s, where they outlined kind of here's what we need to know about reproductive health for women. We know that there's some concerns around, particularly around childbearing, but we know women are exposed to, chemicals, biological and radiologic exposures on the fire ground. We know there's an impact of shift work on reproductive health, and then just the strain of the job and emergency response. And with particular to pregnancy, high ambient temperatures and noise. We also learned through the qualitative piece that women and reproductive health, safety of pregnancy, those types of things were extremely understudied. The research from the 90s basically laid out here's the research that we need on the health of women in the fire service, what we need to know about reproductive health, what we need to know about the health outcomes, pregnancy, those types of things. They laid out like this beautiful approach to the research that needed to be done. And what our team did basically, and with our first FEMA funded work and NIH funded work, was to pick up exactly where that was left off 20 years before and start up on it. And we know that from it really laid out that we don't know much about child health impacts from having a mom who's a firefighter while she's pregnant, and that really the impact of those occupational exposures. It's leading to some really interesting work on, and there was not the last research agenda setting meeting, but the one before, there was a big push for we need to know more about the health of women in the fire service. And someone in the back of the room stood up and said, we have such a small pot of money, and it's a small pot. It's not growing fast in terms of what it's funding. Since women are such a small sample, is it really worth researching them? And while at the moment, I, of course, grabbed the microphone and stepped up on my soapbox, based on our research that suggested that maybe part of the reason we have such low rates of women is because there's so little research on them, and they don't know, is it safe to be pregnant and a firefighter at the same time, and those types of questions. I think for women in the fire service, the research has been too late in coming. We know so little about them compared to what we know about men. But I appreciated that someone finally had the nerve to say that out loud so we could address that. And address that a lot of the things now that we're learning about the health of women in the fire service is reframing questions about what we should know about men in the fire service. So we had a study that this was based on the data from the NIH project that we did, or study that we did, and we found that rates of miscarriage for women in the fire service were over double the rates of miscarriage for women in the general population. So 2.3 times higher for firefighters. The follow-up study that we did on that work actually found that the rates of miscarriage, and this was from the FEMA funded study, were actually higher for volunteer firefighters than they were for careers. So 42% higher for volunteers, over the 2.3 times higher for career firefighters, which has, amazingly useful implications, right? So in a couple ways, one being that we know that reproductive health concerns, obviously pregnancy is specific to women in the fire service, but we can't assume that there aren't reproductive health concerns for men in the fire service. So it's the same, endocrine disrupting chemicals that are likely impacting the health of women that are impacting the health of men, but in different ways. So this has led to some work. There's some work underway and some work that's under review with FEMA, looking at things like sperm and the health of sperm. So looking at fire exposed. So if you're fire exposed, LA County is working on this right now, and there's a proposal to look at it with wildland firefighters. Pre and post fire exposure, do you see changes in sperm of firefighters? Is there less sperm? Is it less healthy sperm, basically, if you're fire exposed? It's also led to some work, definitely from these results, we need to look at the health of the offspring of firefighters. One study that was just published that our team worked on with some folks from NIOSH actually found an increased risk, and this was a national survey, so very few male firefighters in it, but just with the males that were in that sample, we found higher rates of birth defects among men in the fire service. So I think this begs, more research is needed, begs a lot more questions. So I think one of the beauties of looking at the health of women in the fire service is it is really leading us to ask some more questions about the health of men in the fire service too, that I don't think we would have asked if we didn't have this information and data that was so stark and startling. We also started a line of looking at discrimination and harassment. This was not originally our goal. We had some questions in there, but it was very exploratory. But when we looked at rates overall of behavioral health for women, we find that rates of things like post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and depression are a little bit higher for women in the fire service, and rates of injury. So one could say, oh, they have higher rates of these things, they have higher rates of injury. It could just be that they're not made to do the job. They're not tough enough to do the job. It's something about being a woman that makes them less able. But when we started looking at that just in the big chunk, the large data, it didn't make sense. It didn't hang together with the qualitative work we've done. So I spent hundreds of hours sitting and talking to women in the fire service, groups of women, one-on-one interviews. And I can tell you, and this is with scientific certainty, they're a pretty badass group of women. They tend to be very dedicated, love the job, work really hard. And so the fact that we saw really high rates of some of these behavioral health concerns and injuries really didn't hang with the what we'd seen qualitatively. And so we started to dig into that and go, what could be impacting it? Like, what is that piece that we haven't looked at? And we fortunately had collected some nice data on discrimination and harassment. And so we looked at, was that the impact? And lo and behold, it was. When you divide levels of discrimination and harassment into low, medium, and high. So women who say, no, not pretty accepted, that lower third that's saying pretty accepted in the firehouse, not experiencing anything based on my gender. Low, high, and being, it's pretty pervasive and it's all the freaking time. And look at it and divide it into those tertiles, and then you look at outcomes. It is, from a scientific perspective, beautiful. From a human perspective, tragic. But it is a really direct relationship. So those women who are brought into the firehouse and treated, supported at the kitchen table, where we do see so much resilience building, those women were pretty spot on with what we see rates of depression for men in the fire service. Now, if you bring them in and you put them in a bad environment, triple the risk of experiences of depression. So those women who are experiencing high levels of discrimination and harassment, about half of them are also experiencing in the range of clinical concern for depression, and medium is right there too. Similar with anxiety, you see just this direct relationship between experiences of discrimination and harassment and symptoms of anxiety. Same is true for post-traumatic stress. About 7% are in the range of concern. Again, smack dab on what we see for men in the fire service and similar samples. But when you have those high levels of discrimination, harassment, post-traumatic stress symptoms, and people in the range of concern, significantly higher. And it's really, if you think about it in terms of the impact, it's tragic how much that environmental impact. In some ways, it's tragic how much of an impact it can have. In other ways, there's so much hope because we can alter discrimination harassment, right? And I think this is the spot where we see just this is not an issue for the fire service. For other places, this is very much an HR issue, where you're going to get sued, all those types of things. It's very much not that for the fire service. It's very much a psychological safety. It's very much a day-to-day, are we taking care of our people? That resilience building of the kitchen table has an impact, and it is not just it makes people feel better. There's a very real implication for robbing people of that kitchen table approach. On the mental side and on the physical side. So when we ask questions about how many poor physical health days did you have, significantly more for women who experienced high levels of discrimination and harassment. And those women were also significantly more likely to report an injury in the last year. So again, it's not just an HR issue. It's not just a harmless joking, having fun and excluding people. Low, right on where men are in the fire service. So the research on women, it's really evolving. Some pieces of it, we need to be looking at what about women and the way they approach the job makes them healthier than men in the fire service. How is it that they overcome so much of the environment that is challenging to men? I think also looking specifically at moving these issues about workplace incivility out of the HR office and into the health and safety office, because that is absolutely where they belong. And then also looking at the reproductive health, looking at understanding really what's linked to miscarriage. We know that women who go off the job in the first trimester tend to have better health outcomes than it related to miscarriage and preterm birth than women who are who stay on the job and on the track longer. So digging into kind of those things, and also looking at child health outcomes, which I think is another one. In terms of cancer risk, we really have a lot of mechanistic pieces that we're looking at for cancer risk for women, and things that are obviously specific to women, like we can't look at cervical cancer. And then we have looked at, there's some work looking at breast cancer. The one study that got an elevated rate of breast cancer was actually just in the sample of men. Because even the huge studies, that the 30,000 firefighter studies have less than 1,000 women in them. So there's a lot more research that needs to be done in terms of cancer. Across the board, we can kind of start to repeat the research that's been done on men and looking at women and where they're similar and different, but I think it can lead to some awesome future directions, because as always, more research is needed. That is mine. The end of my slides. Trying to capture that all in 5 slides is a bit of a challenge, but I will invite, and I made the 5-slide rule up, and I regret doing that, but I will toss it back over to John.
And what I like greatly is, particularly for yourself, Susie, and a couple other people that learned how to maximize what you could actually fit on 5 slides. You didn't talk about how much stuff you could cram into 5, but it had to be 5. So, but I think it was really important to do that, which is awesome. So, and I think that dovetails well with my first question, because we'll open it up to participants here if they have questions. But I think I'm going to ask one for both of you in each one of your areas too. Is it, if you're new in the fire service, new in a leadership position, perhaps new in HR or health and safety, and you're looking at this, it is very much one of those, holy crap, what do I do? Where do I start moments? So what piece in both spheres, both specific to concerns and improvements for female firefighters, and then globally relative to obesity, fitness, diet, nutrition, if somebody was going to ask you, because I am, where do I start? What's the first step in the long staircase to improvement? Where do you begin to have an impact?
Susie, you want to go first?
Well, just sort of a general caveat, and I think you'll probably agree to this, is this is none of the issues that I talked about and that I've been involved with in my research is related to one segment of the fire service. It's across all the fire service, and it is across all generational and time on duty, time and years of service. So I guess the good news, John, to get into your answer, is that it's not something that the chief is going to have to think, okay, well, I've got to do this for these guys and this for these guys and this for them. This is something that fits across the board. And Sara, I think you can say, I mean, that will fit in for stress, PTSD, anxiety, harassment, bullying, all of those things. This is everybody's issue. So that's a unifying thing. We're in it for each other. We're in it to help everybody. So it was a place to start. I think one of the things that was in the slides was that those across the board health promotion type programs and wellness type programs are a general approach to helping and making an awareness of a lot of the problems. And to get something like that going sort of as a first pass would be great. I know particularly I singled out alcohol, that's one where you may need some more targeted types of interventions for those people who may be struggling with that as something that they're, individually having to deal with more than a general message of information and awareness, which may be enough to kick back the behavior of some people. But those that are really challenged and are really having some issues may need a more targeted thing. And the same thing for those who perhaps are morbidly obese, and that means that BMIs are greater than 40. Those individuals may need more of a targeted approach because they probably will need some clinical guidance. They'll need some clinical input and management to help them really make some large weight loss and stuff like that improvements. So I guess as a general thing, I think if you're just going to try to do something as a chief and you walk in, there's not much happening, start there with a general type of wellness program to approach a lot of them. So Sara, why don't you kick in some thoughts you have?
No, I think you're right. I think that the approach for all of it, and when even looking at, we started talking about cancer and reproductive health as we move forward on some of this stuff nationally. And it's interesting because in some ways I think, oh, are we making the tie that those fit together? But again, what's going to prevent cancers, staying away from carcinogens, the decon, those types of things. There's also the things that are going to support reproductive health. And so I think that is I think you're right on that. The good news is overall health and wellness is overall health and wellness. And it doesn't have to be, okay, what this specific group, okay, this group, have to decon or eat healthy, but this group does, like overall health and wellness. I do think though that one of the, in terms of the, oh shit, what now piece, I think Steve does a great job talking about that. And he said the worst thing you can do is try and do everything at once. And so I think that I think it is so overwhelming. I mean, when I give the miscarriage statistics, you always see people's eyes go like, oh, wow, that's huge. But I think we can't do everything at once, but we know better. So now I think we do better on what we can do better on. And I think it takes all right, let's take a step back. Let's focus on overall health and wellness. I think that in some ways it's a good thing that there is not one thing that's causing cancer in the fire service. There's not one that's causing on-duty deaths, and there's not one thing that's causing miscarriage. So yeah, you can't fix it all at once. But I think the big picture, starting with the first step is where you go. It's not all overnight, but it all is related. So I think trying to just start with okay, do I have a strong health and wellness program? If not, what do I do there? If I have a strong health and wellness program, how can I augment it and make better? Those types of things. Interesting
that neither of you said, pull the blanket back over your head, ignore it, and it'll go away. So inaction, that's a strategy.
Yeah, I mean, you could, that would be an option. That would be an option.
But certainly not the option we'd advocate for.
No. And one of the things in occupational health now is a concept called total worker health, which means that you really involve everybody in the process. So again, I would encourage any chief not to think, well, what do I want to do for my people? What am I going to do essentially to them in terms of what I'm going to bring in or what I'm going to advocate? It would be to engage them. Because no matter what firehouse you go into, there will be things that are issues and there'll be things that are not. And boy, have we seen that as we've traveled across the country and been in the firehouses and done this and talked to the guys and the women, because it varies so much. So you would start by talking with your crews, talking with your people that are in your houses and finding out what are the key things that they're bothering them. And the place to do it is like Sarah and I both have said, it's around the kitchen table, you know, or if it's a volunteer group at the monthly meetings, you know, or weekly, however y'all meet. And to start to listen and see and observe what are the issues, and then start to chip away at those based on the engagement and where's the energy. Because if you go for the hard one first, the hardest one, you're going to maybe lose everybody. But if you're going to start at the things that are important to them, you'll probably get some successes under your belt and build your trust.
And I think that your terminology is apt. We're not doing it for them. We're not doing it to them. We're doing it with them. And I think that participative piece really makes a huge impact on implementation. And hand in hand with that is, don't think for a minute that you have to be an authority, a boss in the organization, the fire chief. This is, all of these things, all of these behaviors, all these changes can be implemented at the individual level to both of your points, regardless of time in the fire service, gender, role, shape, size, description, whatever. All of us have things or opportunities that we have in order to get better. So don't wait for your boss to do it. Go be that person today.
I think one of the cool things about the total worker health model that you talked about is it's not just at the individual, and it's talking about total worker health in terms of everything for the worker, all like it's obviously not one thing for health, it's the behavioral health, physical health, all those types of things. But it's also total worker health in terms of how does the system and the organization impact all those types of things. But I think what you said, Jen, is brilliant, because even if you have an organization that is jacked up and not supportive and all those types of things, the individual can still have control over what they do. And if you think about like the company officer, you can have it's awesome to see the crews that have really that really support each other. And that, I think the biggest success in the fire service is a story of what we've seen with the fire service. And the positive peer pressure around that's just not what we do now. Like, that's not what the fire service is. Rates of smoking in the fire service lower than the military, lower than the general population. Like it's pretty amazing. And when you get a crew that coalesces around, we will be healthy together. It's awesome what they can do. And it's awesome at the crew level, at the department level. You also can see that, I think around some of the alcohol use, we know qualitatively some of the alcohol use is at a crew level. If you see a crew that drinks heavily, they often drink heavily together. So I think, but I think your point of, even if they're not doing it, even if the department's not providing what it should, that even if the crew's not, you can always, I love the better every shift approach of, it's, you don't have to change overnight. You don't have to go from 0 to 100. You got to go from 0 to 1, and then tomorrow go from 1 to 2.
And influence the things you can touch, right? I mean, you guys know I'm a massive proponent of my corner of the world management. Is if you're a lieutenant or a company officer, you've got your company, maybe your small community, whatever. Fix what you can touch. Fix the influence the change that you can do, and it might be. A friend of mine says one of the most dangerous things firefighters do every day is eat. So Susie, to your point, it's like, how about we do that better? Like, let's not deep fry everything that we eat. We can have vegetables are okay. There's not a constitutional ban on vegetables in the fire service, in the firehouse. So let's try that.
Or start with fried vegetables.
Well, yeah, if it takes frying a vegetable to get people to eat their vegetable, I mean, I guess, yeah, that's not quite where I was going, but I guess it's possible. But it's interesting you said, young firefighter. I was a very young firefighter. Had a motivated captain that it wasn't a question that as long as it wasn't raining or snowing, we were going to the neighborhood college, and your expectation was you're going in circles around the track for the hour that we were there, and he didn't care if you walked backwards, did handstands, jumping jack, whatever. But the entire company, it was double company house, everybody was going. And at the time, I remember this because it exactly supports what you said. The his apparatus operator, our apparatus operator was an older gentleman. I mean, he was in his 60s and not the most physically healthy individual on the planet, but guess what? He went and moved. He didn't move at the rate or the pace of everybody else, but he was out there. And you don't know, but did that add longevity to his career? So doing the things that you can do that make a difference on a daily basis becomes really, really important. So we do have a couple of attendees.
Yeah,
small
changes can make a big difference, and we teach that a lot with nutrition. It's like, we tell people, try to get the sugary things out of your life, and it's like, well, I drink 5 Diet Cokes a day. Well, I'm not saying you got to go in and drop 5 Diet Cokes today, or or 5 regular Cokes, whatever it is. What I'm saying is, okay, this week could you do away with 1?
Yeah.
And then, in a week, it's like, yeah, I did fine, and what about didn't go to 2? So you make the small changes, and those are individual, but you learn, and it isn't like, then I have to change this and this and this and this and this too, or I'm a failure. Well, no, that's not what it is. Any change can be good and in a measured way.
So I'm going to point to Sara for this. So our participants, put your brain in gear, because I'm sure you have questions for these 2 genius level people, and we're gonna get to your questions in 1 second. But Sara, with that, talk about the concept that you've been sharing for the past year or so about just the 1%, just that one little bit better, and how that can have an impact.
I think it's what I hang on to, because I being at 75% better is a bit much for me at any given time, but definitely 1%. I know there are a couple of groups out there. I know there's a Better Every Shift podcast that's been awesome. There's a O2X has 1% better, and I kind of came around to it through doing a presentation with O2X, and Bryce was doing his, and he was talking about being 1% better, doing 1% better. Now he's a former special forces guy, and so it's not like his 1% better piece. I'm like, that seems a bit overwhelming. And I was watching Chris Nickett. She was the first person with Down syndrome to finish an Ironman, and his thing is 1% better every day. And I actually met him not long ago at an event here in Kansas City, and man, he presented it, and people born with Down syndrome, important to me because I have a 7-year-old who has Down syndrome, and my husband says will someday compete in an Ironman. So now we're training a 7-year-old for an Ironman someday. But he talked about, and I had a great conversation with his dad. His dad said, even our friends and family thought I was crazy to get him to do this. He was, at the time he was obese. He's like, I couldn't get him off the couch. He just wanted to play video games. And it's harder for people with Down syndrome. They have lower muscle tone. It's harder for them to really do anything. It takes double the effort. And he said, I talked to the family and I said, I'm going to get him running a 5K. They were like, there's no way. And he said, I'm not going to get him running a 5K tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to run down the block. And man, I watched Chris. He did some laps running with the kids at the event. That kid is fast now. And he's like, you just 1%. He's like, every day you do a little bit better. Some days you don't want to do it, but you get up and you do it, and you're 1% better as you just got off the couch. And I'm like, okay, if Chris Nickett can run an Ironman, and he now is an author and a public speaker and all these things, and like, if he can do that, I think there's not a firefighter I know that can't do that. You don't have all that physical, low muscle tone, all that kind of stuff. So if Chris can do it, anyway.
And there's legitimately a series of apps available that is, couch to 5K, that for if you need a motivator, if you need a way to and I, when I wanted to get better, I used one for a while. It's building blocks to get you to start from nothing, literally off the couch, to be able to run a 5K, which it's not as intimidating as you think it is. So participant folks, if you want to just raise your hand or come off mute and ask a question. Oh, Nick, do you want to come off and mute and ask the question, please?
Am I there? Am I
Yes,
here?
sir, you are.
Yes.
Cool.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Great presentation. I love both you guys. You guys are doing amazing work for the fire service. So thank you. I was going to ask, I remember from the old WFI stuff about how attacking the modifiable risk factors was like a really great way to reduce cancer risk. And I want to make sure that's still relevant and that's still accurate, because that's really kind of burned into my mind. And then if it is, do you think we're doing a good job of emphasizing that component when we talk about cancer in the fire service? I think we're doing really good talking about, the particulate and hoods and washing and capture. And I think we're doing a lot of the engineering stuff really, really well, but I feel like we get lost on that part. But what is your take on that? Is that still accurate? You think we're doing a good job from your vantage points?
Well, say real quick, I think we are, the WFI messages are there. They're good. They're still relevant. We want people to address those things, because you remember you saw cancer on, I think, every one of my slides. And so there are definitely relevant areas. Are we doing a good job? Well, if we go to the 1%, I think, yeah, we're doing some things. Can we do more? Absolutely. Do those messages need to be reinforced and put out in different ways, in different venues, with different emphasis? Because now, people are thinking, well, it's chemicals, it's PFAS. If we get rid of PFAS, everything will be good. Well, I want PFAS to go away too, but unfortunately, it's everywhere. And we're working on it. But there are so many other things that are manageable and that you can do something about today, tomorrow, and the next day. So I think we need some new messaging now in light of, I think, what we're learning as we get smarter and smarter in science and in what we know. So Sara?
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with you that I think that, it seems easier and so much more job specific to talk about the gross decon and PFAS free gear and all those things, which I totally agree with Susie, because I always agree with Susie. But it is, when you look at, where we see firefighters on average when they drink, they're drinking 3.5 drinks. That's exactly where you start to see significant increases for cancer. So I 100% think that is a drum we should all be beating. And it's even more important because we have the other risk factors. It's even more important. Sleep. I mean, fire service sleeping, consistently less than 6 hours a night. That's in and of itself a carcinogen. So I think all those other things, yeah, I think we really need to up our game on that when we talk about cancer prevention.
And
Thanks,
Chief, I appreciate the question, Chief, because it's that you hit it on the head, and I think Sarah's answers really fits well too. Is we don't often think of sleep and hydration and what I ate for lunch as things that are protective mechanisms relative to cancer, but yet here we are. So since I want to be respectful of people's times, and we're almost used up our entire time, I'll turn it to Sara, then Susie for final thoughts, and we'll wrap up. So final thoughts, Susie.
Well, first off, thank you, John. Thank you, Sara, for getting Nerdstock together. That was awesome. It's been a pleasure to be a part of it. Final thoughts on those things that I covered. I think the key word was in my title, modifiable. And that's sort of where we're ending up with this discussion here. They're modifiable, they are approachable, they're doable, and it's up to us as individuals. Another thing, knowledge does not predict behavior. So some things you've heard today is that you need reinforcement, you need that team, that group that's there with you. And in the fire service, it's just ready-made. We have our crews, we have the people, our houses that we work with. And so you're set up for success where the general population is not. So I encourage everybody to think about what you can do today, tomorrow, and the next day, because all those factors, I mean, as an epidemiologist, you look at, they're called multifactorial etiology diseases. And so that means there's always going to be a whole bunch of things that can cause one of those conditions, one of those health consequences. Pick one that you can work on and do it. So, Sara?
Yeah, and I think how awesome that there's so much stuff we can do. It sometimes feels like fatalistic. Oh, we're all going to die of cancer. Well, no, we're not. And there are things that you can do that and be proactive about. So I think that's definitely a positive. And I think it doesn't have to happen overnight, right? 1% better every shift, all that.
Outstanding. So I think, sorry, we dropped you there, but thank you both for taking time out, because I know you're both incredibly busy people, and thank you first from a fire service perspective for choosing to take on that as an industry or an area of concentration, because there's so many, I'm sure throughout both of your careers, there's so many directions that you could have gone in, but you chose to come to the fire service and stick with the fire service. And we as a fire service are so much better off because of that. So thank you both. Thank you for spending some time with us today. And for anybody that watched this, or the other presenters at Nerdstock are in the process of doing their similar sessions, please go to the Science Alliance website and take a look at the PowerPoints and the information from Nerdstock, and a truckload of other really useful information to help you as an individual, as a firefighter at the company level or department level, to get just that little bit better. So with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.